Steve and Holly Sterne are next.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank those that put on this competition today very much. It's a privilege to be here. Now, I promise I will infuse information about our farm into what I'm going to speak about, but I'm not going to speak primarily about the farm because there is a much more interesting topic to talk about. And when you get an opportunity like this, I'd much rather do that. For those of you that get bored with what I'm about to say, we do provide pictures up here to keep you entertained. Please don't try and relate these, though, necessarily to what I'm about to say. They don't have a direct correlation. I'm more interested in the process of how the farming industry addresses and connects with the public at large. This is a topic that should and must be of interest to all of you sitting in this room. You can barely open a paper these days or turn your television on without at some stage being made aware of climate change. But is climate change the issue that really faces the farming industry? Or at least, is it the most important issue that faces the farming industry? I read an interesting article from the Guardian newspaper. It was published in September this year, and in it they reported on demographers' latest work that found that the world's population will grow from its current 7.1 billion people to 11 billion people by the end of this century. 11 billion people, roughly 40% more than what we've got now, in merely 85 years. Now that's within, no, not your lifetime, but at least your children's lifetime. This will be an issue that you have to face, or that they will have to face. So what are the challenges this brings to agriculture? Well, the very first word that comes to mind is the word intensification. Intensifying agricultural industry is going to be a trend that is unavoidable. Increasing more from less is almost a foregone logical extension of having a world's population explode to 11 billion people if we want to feed them all. And if we don't feed them all, then the consequences are that we're going to have to put up with a lot more people starving or suffering from starvation. But when you talk about intensive agricultural industry, it almost certainly raises the ire of certain members in our community. It's often associated with rampant raping and pillaging of the environment we're in, or it's associated with profit mongers who use public resources for their own benefit. But the truth is that we actually have to consider how each of us are going to increasingly produce more from less. Can you hear me with that, without this? Doesn't seem to be, it works off intermittently. So, the first slide was help, because that's really where we're going to come from here. Patawa is a farm that is an intensive farm. It does produce a lot of product. Nearly 8,000 tonnes of meat come off our farm per annum. All of it in the form of pork. Now, I won't bore you with all the details of our production, but suffice to say the head's on the front end, the tail's on the back, and all these little fellas here are the ones that we will use for finally selling. These girls are all run outdoors. And the reason we run them outdoors is because we're well aware that the consumer today is vitally interested in how their product is produced. They're not only interested in where it comes from, what its health benefits are, but they want to know how is it produced. Is it produced ethically? Is it sustainable? And we have adopted this method of production primarily because we perceived that ethically raising animals was going to become a really important issue for the consumer at large. Now, it may not be necessary for the consumer to understand the science. The reality is that pigs can be raised indoors and perfectly adequately. But the consumer is not necessarily willing to understand the science, and frankly probably couldn't care less in most instances. What we as farmers have to do is be able to adapt to the consumer's demands and still at the same time achieve the requirement or the goal of increasing production levels to the extent that we're able to feed the world's populations. And that task is largely going to fall upon our shoulders as farmers and upon the politicians. Good to see they're represented here today. It is important that we develop good policies around this debate. And one of my great concerns would be that when we debate these issues, that too often the single issues are debated in isolation. And sadly, you'll sometimes see that sustainability is pulled out of its context and debated on its own. And we're no longer connecting it to the greater goal, the overarching goal of how do we produce enough meat or enough products, or enough of anything to feed the world's population. So when we started farming, we were interested not just in scale, and these bigger heady issues were not really foremost in my mind. The truth is, I just wanted to farm to feed my family and to provide work for my children if that became necessary. I think some of them are probably a little unemployable, but I'm very grateful for the input of my daughter Holly here and my wife, who I must acknowledge have helped enormously in our development. We've produced pigs outdoors in large quantities, and it's just kept on growing, mainly because we found that it was more profitable to do that than it was to diversify. Every time we looked at some other business enterprise, it became difficult to justify. But that meant that we've also had a large amount of product to sell. And over time, we have tended to drive more and more towards direct selling in order to get the correct message across both to the public and to the retailer about what is important. We feel this connection is vital as farmers if we are to gain their respect and their help in the process of telling the message. We try and do things in a sustainable manner. One of the exercises we are doing here is farming pigs under trees. One of the challenges for any intensive industry is how do we minimise our impact on the environment? And that's significant. 8,000 tonnes of meat a year. It's 115,000 pigs coming off the farm. It's about one every 5 minutes around the clock. There's a lot of pig meat. A lot of pigs produce a lot of, you know what. And what comes out the bottom end has to be dealt with. So one of the challenges we had to undertake was how do we deal with that? And one of the ways we do that is by running very low stocking rates. And we also seek to capture a lot of the effluent we produce from our grower pigs in a deep litter straw-based system. By doing that, we eliminate the problem of trying to deal with liquid effluent, and we can turn effluent now into a marketable product in the form of soil conditioner or compost that we either sell or utilise ourselves. And so we take that product, we apply it to poor quality land, and after we've done that, we double crop that land in order to strip the nutrients out, or as many nutrients as we possibly can, into a cut and sell operation, cut and carry. Now, most of our pigs are produced in large sheds on this deep litter, and what you're looking at here is an area of the farm that houses all the smaller pigs, and then once they have transferred from this area, they go into larger sheds, where we have about 800 pigs in a shed. If you've ever worked with pigs, you probably know that it's quite a challenge to sort even 2 or 3 pigs apart, let alone 800. So one of the mechanisms that we use to do that is employing computerised weigh scale systems. These are very common in New Zealand. Plenty of sheep farmers think, well, that's old hat. But actually, when it comes to pigs, it's a lot more difficult. And we had to import that technology from the States, where they developed the program that would allow us to do this. And so we are able now to go into a shed of 800 pigs and set the scales at whatever parameters we want and have the pigs all pulled out for us, ready for sale the next morning, simply by setting the scales at the right level. This means that the customer gets the right size pig for their particular market, and the rest get to live another day and grow another pound. All the pigs that we do produce are also traceable back to our farm, or many of them are. One of the reasons we went downstream was to start marketing our pigs directly, was so that the retailer and the manufacturer had the opportunity of saying, these pigs come from this farm, and if you want to know the story, it's here. So with some of our manufacturers, you'll see the farm name carried on their packaging. The same too with the supermarkets that carry our products. They add our name to the packaging. And the purpose for that is simply to provide traceability to the consumer. One of the other factors that hounds intensive industries is ethics. Raising animals in an ethically acceptable manner. Now, we have covered off the fact that we rear pigs outdoors, but we also rear them in large groups. And one of the reasons we do that is to avoid the pig's ability to socialise. So pigs have an ability to form a hierarchy within themselves. That is up until they reach in excess of 100 pigs. Once you go over 100 pigs, they can no longer recognise one another. They all start to look the same. Funny that. So that's a big advantage. Why? Because it means that those pigs no longer want to fight and scrap with one another. They're far more content, far more happy. And it means that the product that we produce at the end is a much more consistent product of a much higher value than what you would perhaps ordinarily find in a smaller piggery. Why did we grow to such a large size? Almost by accident, but the truth is we had a certain set of resources available to us. The best way to drive our costs down was by maximising those resources. Ooh, that was quick. So we really wanted to make sure that we were utilising all of our resources as best we were able. And that meant that we kept on adding on a few more pigs and a few more pigs until finally there was no more room to add on any more pigs. But in that process we have been able to drive our costs down to a point that has kept us profitable in one very tough industry. I just want to mention profit, because profit is often thought of as a bit of a dirty word, but the reality is that without profit you can't innovate. You can't develop systems that are more sustainable, and you can't employ technology by buying it from all those bright people that exist around the rest of the world. We need profit to be able to do that. Our businesses must be profitable, and we shouldn't be shy or reserved about saying that fact. Profit is essential. Thank you very much for your attention, and I welcome any questions. Any hard ones, please direct to my wife, Josie, or Holly. I'll take the easy ones.